Hello, and thank you for joining me again today on the Finding Hope After Loss podcast. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more loss and infertility families. If you want your baby's name included in the special Bereaved Mother's Day post, be sure to get it to me by April 26th. You can comment with the name on my social media posts at Journey for Jasmine. It's on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, all the social media accounts. Or you can also email to me at Sarah with an H at journeyforjasmine.com. So today's business spotlight is from Christiana with her nonprofit, A Mother's Chance. Here is what she had to say.
Hi, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me to help spread awareness on pregnancy loss. My name's Christiana Hall, and my nonprofit is A Mother's Chance. I started this nonprofit in July of last year. My firstborn, Arabella, was actually stillbirth in March of 22, and I went on to have my Rainbow Niklaus. He spent some time in the NICU, but he's doing great now, so I'm really honored to share both of their stories and just see how I can help others in the loss community like they've helped myself the last few years. So the stillbirth of my daughter was a loss of PPROM and incompetent cervix at 23 weeks. We had a perfect pregnancy until we didn't, and I lost a lot of blood and ultimately my daughter. So wanted to go about spreading awareness for that and share all the research that I did that led me to getting a transabdominal cerclage with my son, and had a difficult journey with him just because I noticed I had irritable uterus and still kept going into preterm labor around 30 weeks, but we were able to hold him in until 34 weeks and then still had some NICU time. That involved COVID and so many ups and downs, but that's why it's so important for us to share our story and have lost families, NICU families, everyone in between, just not feel so alone in their grief and to know that there's people who've been through similar situations and there is hope out there and resources to get you the support that you need. I'm always trying to come up with new ways that I can support families, making donations to hospitals and churches and NICUs in honor of them, and really just offering support and a sense of community when people need it the most. You can find us on Instagram at A Mother's Chance or amotherschance.com, and please know you're not alone. We hear you, we see you, we are you. And this is the worst club with the best people. So myself and all these other great nonprofits and businesses are here to support you. And just know I'm sorry for your loss and you're not alone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christiana, for sharing about your organization with us. Today, I am talking with Kelila. She is the mother to 3 children and was a surrogate twice. With her second surrogate pregnancy, she experienced a loss at 16 weeks. After her loss, she created a pregnancy loss resource and toolkit based on her experience to help other loss families. She created this because she found the resources lacking after she went through loss. Hello, everyone. Today I am here with Kelila. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I can. First of all, it is a pleasure to be here, so thank you. I live in Orlando with my husband and my 3 kids. I was born and raised in the Northeast, and then I actually lived in Los Angeles for quite a few years before we came to Florida. And in all of that process, I realized that pregnancy was like my superpower, and I decided to be a surrogate and was able to carry 1 child for the surrogate family. And then on my second journey, which has sort of led me to where I am now, is where I lost the pregnancy at 16 weeks. So that is like the shortest snippet I could possibly say in terms of where I was and where I am.
I love the Orlando area. We usually go down to Indian Rocks Beach We've been
Oh, I
there a few
love
times for,
Indian Rocks.
yeah, we go there for vacation every year. This is the first year we didn't just because life, but yeah,
Right.
no, it's definitely nice down there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. My kids actually and I went at the beginning of the summer and we saw manatees that were so close. My son, I was like, "Don't pet them." And he's like, "But he just rubbed up against my leg." I'm like, "Don't touch."
Oh, I'm so jealous. That's like, I really want to see those, but we're not ever there the right time of year because we're usually there
No.
in the summer. So I'm like, we got to go because that is like one of my life goals is to see the manatees.
It was awesome.
Well, that's good to know that it's as good as I hear.
Yes.
I know, I guess it is kind of hard not to pet them, right?
Right, they're like right there in front of you. I was like, I know they're close, but keep your hands up.
So what is it that made you, I mean, I know you mentioned that you like being pregnant and you feel, strong, like, but what led you kind of to that surrogacy journey?
So in each of my pregnancies for my own kids, my kids are now 12, almost 10 and 7. I never had any of the normal pregnancy symptoms that all my friends always talked about. I never had morning sickness. I never had swollen ankles. I never had preeclampsia or any sort of complication. My kids, thank God, all had super textbook pregnancy, labor, delivery, everything. And I felt so blessed to be able to go through that without any complications. I never had a miscarriage. I never had any sort of problem in getting pregnant. And so when I really had my third child, my husband and I were in a place where I wanted to be pregnant again, but realistically having another child was potentially not a prospect at the time because of finances, because of where we lived, because of the size of our house, and all those other little factors that come in. And I started looking into surrogacy because I thought, if I have such an easy time being pregnant and I enjoy it so much, then this could be an amazing opportunity for me to be pregnant for somebody else who can't have that same experience. And so when we looked into it, there's a lot of different things that happened in terms of our religion played into it and who we could actually be a surrogate for and things like that. But learning all of the different laws of how it happened and how it could work in the United States, specifically in California at the time where we were living, and then being able to go through with caring for somebody else was just such a gift and such a blessing. And I would always say, like, selfishly, I love being pregnant. And so people would look at me like I was this unicorn, like, what do you mean you like being pregnant? I'm like, no, I promise there are people like that out there in the world. There's not a lot, but we do exist. I swear.
I actually no, I'm kind of on the same side. Like I like being pregnant too. And
Mhm.
I mean, I've obviously been through loss myself, but the pregnancy part itself, I enjoy it, and
Yeah.
I was lucky like you, I didn't have like the throwing up all day or the any of that stuff, just a little bit of nausea that I'm like, yeah, that's not so bad. So no, I understand
Right.
what you're saying for sure.
Yeah. And it's one of those where I felt like any little symptom I felt was sort of just the blessing of knowing that the baby was in there and growing and healthy. And I kept thinking like, well, this all makes sense. Yeah, like towards the end, I feel like a beached whale, but at the same time, I'm like, but I have a human in there.
Right. It is kind of a very empowering thing to know that you've created a life.
Yeah.
So are there a lot of like hoops you have to jump through to become a surrogate? Is it like a long process or how does that work?
Yes and no. When you first look into surrogacy, I looked into an agency and they were very funny because they said things will happen so quickly. And so I was thinking, like, great, I'll be pregnant in 6 months. Like, this will be perfect. And it's a lot of hurry up and wait. So you have to go for a medical screening. You have to go for a psychological screening. You have to match with a couple. You have to make sure that whatever your beliefs are, the same beliefs that they have, because you're going to be carrying their child. So, like, one of the questions we had a little bit of an issue with in finding the right couple was it's a 5-page questionnaire. And one of the questions said, if medically necessary, would you be okay with having an abortion? And my husband and I are both very much in the pro-life camp. And so for us, saying medically necessary means a lot. That means my life is at risk or the baby's life is at risk. So without questioning, we said, yes, of course. Like that's not even something we would say take 30 seconds to consider. If my life is at risk, yes, that's not a question. Of course, we would have an abortion in that case. But to other people, that means a lot of different things. So making sure that you're on the right page with your spouse, making sure that you're on the right page with the couple you can match with, all of those things take a long time. And it's not that they're hoops to jump through. It's just that it's a lot more to think about than trying to get pregnant on your own. Um, so the process from start to finish, when we first decided that I could look into surrogacy, was when my youngest was about a year old. I think he was just over a year in 2017. And then by the time I matched with somebody that I really felt like this was the perfect couple, it was around November of 2018. And then I got pregnant in March of 2019. So looking back on it, it didn't feel like that long of a process. But at the same time, this couple also had been trying for years. And so to them, I'm sure it was, a lifetime in terms of feeling like, would they ever have a child?
That is such an amazing gift that you're
Thank
able to give them. I mean,
Thank you.
I think that's just an amazing thing that you were able to do for them. So I know that you said your son was only one.
Mm-hmm.
So did he really understand like that you had a baby, but the baby wasn't coming
So
home?
no, we used to say, I mean, it was hysterical. When the baby was actually born, it was 2019, right before COVID. It was December of 2019. So at that point, my oldest was 8, my middle child was 6, and my youngest was 4. And right, I think that makes sense. Yeah. 3.5. And so we used to say, it was so funny because my daughter, we used to talk about it a lot. She understood the idea. She had seen me pregnant twice already at that point. She had 2 brothers. Would we be able to keep the baby? If there was more than one, were we allowed to keep one of them? Could we name the baby? Like, she had all these questions that were really, really cute for her brain to try and process what was going on. My middle child was probably the hardest, so I'll come back to him in a second. And my youngest had never seen me pregnant, didn't know what it was like to have a younger brother or sister. So to him, it was totally natural for me to be pregnant and be like, no, this is their child. It's not our child. So after the baby was born, thank God we were very close with the couple. And we were allowed to go over and see the baby a lot before they ended up traveling home. And so my oldest got a chance in the hospital to hold him and to bottle feed him and to really connect with him on a level that was like, oh, this is like my cousin. This is really sweet. My younger one really couldn't have cared less. Like, he was like, great, there's another baby, but he's not ours. So big deal.
Right.
My middle child, when I first got home from the hospital, his behavior was totally off. And at first I was like, what is going on with him? Like, this is so unlike him. And then I realized he's seen me pregnant once and we have a baby at home. Now he's seen me pregnant again and there's no baby. In his mind, does that mean I'm okay with giving up a baby, or that maybe he thought somehow this baby was related to us? And so I really sat down with him and tried to go over what had just happened and process everything. And when he was then able, after we all got home from the hospital, the baby came home the same day I did, but to be able to go over to where they were staying and hold the baby and see that he was with parents who absolutely adored him, and that was where he was meant to be. I mean, he looked exactly like his father, so there was no denying that he was not ours. All of a sudden, you could see his perspective go, oh, that's not my sibling. I get it now, and I get that he belongs with the family that he's with. And his
So he
behavior
needed to
was
like
normal.
visually see that.
Yeah.
So then you decided to be a surrogate again for a second time.
For a second time, while I was actually in labor, we were all like, when can we do this again? So my doula told me that I need to give my body at least a year to recover. She said they really like to see closer to 18 months because you're really putting your body through a lot, not just in pregnancy, but because you're getting pregnant by IVF, there's a lot of shots and hormones that go with it that you really want your body to be as cleared out as possible from the first round. So I had gotten that mindset that I said, okay, obviously I'm not going to get pregnant within the year 2020. And then when COVID hit, it was like, well, now I'm really not getting pregnant this year. And there was a lot of different hoops that time to say like, okay, well, the scientists are trying to figure out, what does COVID do to the fetus? What does COVID do to the mother? What would happen in all these different scenarios? And they still don't have answers to that. But by January of 2022, I had finally gotten COVID. And I think I was probably the only person on the face of the earth that, like, when I saw the positive test, it was like getting a positive pregnancy test where I screamed and I was like, ah! And my daughter comes running into my room, like, what is wrong with you? So I texted the fertility agency and I let them know, and they said, okay, when you recover, let's start the discussion of then starting medication. And in May of 2022, I was able to go in for the transfer and everything looked great. I was going in for my weekly checkups, and at about 9 or 10 weeks of pregnancy, you transfer over from a fertility group to your OB. And again, everything was looking fantastic. I went in at 10 weeks, I went in at 12 weeks, and they scheduled me to come back at 16 weeks for a normal 16-week checkup. And it was 16 weeks and 5 days. And I came in, and my kids were all with me because I thought, great, we're going to see the baby. We'll be able to take some videos for the parents and send them to them. And there was no heartbeat. And in that moment, it was one of those where my whole world and my whole perception of the world changed so quickly and so drastically. And my therapist said to me, it was that innocence of loss that was taken away from you, because pregnancy had always gone in a certain way and you had never had any complications. So to all of a sudden go from no complications to really the worst thing that could happen was life altering. And I know it happens to a lot of us, right? Pregnancy, 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in loss. So to know that this was my 5th pregnancy and I hadn't yet experienced that was, I mean, it was a miracle at that point. But to go through that, and especially when it wasn't mine, not only did I have to worry about my children, myself, and my husband, but I had to then also worry about the other family to say, okay, what happens next? What do I do? Are you sure? I mean, I questioned that, they say in grief, you go into that automatic denial. I was put in the hospital and they had to induce labor. And even up until the moment the baby was coming out, I was like, are they sure? Are they positive there's no heartbeat? Like, can you just check again? Can you do another ultrasound? Can you just keep it on there? Maybe he's just quiet. Maybe it's sleeping. Like, I denied everything. And it's been a process. It's not something I would ever wish on my worst enemy, let alone on a regular person. And it's awful. It was truly one of the worst moments of my life.
And I know that that's got to add, like you said, a whole other layer onto it too. The fact that it was a surrogate baby too.
Right.
So it was your loss and their loss.
Right. Right.
So
And managing those emotions, it was one where as a parent, we haven't had to deal with loss yet, thankfully. And so managing my own emotions and then managing at the time, my 11-year-old's emotions and my other 2 boys, I, I, I mean, I sat in bed and cried for days and days, and I would like deep dive into Pinterest, and I would deep dive into the internet and miscarriage symptoms and what happens after the miscarriage and why does it classify as a miscarriage versus a stillbirth, and all of those things, where my daughter would just sit and cry with me in bed. And it was really, I mean, that was one thing I have to say was really special, to know that at 11 years old she was so empathetic to understand what was going on.
yeah. Did the boys understand?
My younger one asked me multiple times, can I give the baby a hug? Because he would hug my belly and he would give my belly a kiss, and he would say, I can't wait to have the other surrogate baby have a brother, and this is so exciting. And he understood at that point what it meant to be a surrogate. And so we were sitting in my bed 2 or 3 days after I had gotten home from the hospital, and he said to me, can I give your belly a kiss for the baby? And I looked at him and I said, you remember the baby's not in there, right? And he was like, what? No. I said, do you remember I had to go into the hospital? And he said, yes. I said, well, the baby passed away. It's not in there anymore. And it happened a few times after that where he was like, but can I give your belly a hug? Like, why can't I give the baby a hug? And so to have to keep explaining it to him, in his mind, that's how he had to process it. But it just, brought it back every single time.
Right. So after this, did you do the surrogacy thing again, or that was?
So at that point, it was one of those where I had to then figure out with the doctors if I was allowed to do it again, because there was no explanation for what happened, and there was no concrete information to say that It was something with the baby. It was something with me. They actually said I was not allowed to do surrogacy again because it was no longer considered to be the perfect place to have a baby grow, right? And if this couple is going to be investing so much money in terms of having a baby, they want to make sure that the uterus that it's going into really is the healthiest uterus that there is. And so in the entire journey of surrogacy, I really felt like I had gotten messages from God, higher source, whatever you want to call it, guiding me in every step of the way as to what decisions I should make, which couple I should become a surrogate for, things like that. And this was, again, one of those where my husband and I were questioning, like, do I put my body through that again? Do I put my family through that again? Now that we know what could happen, where we didn't have that mindset before, is it safe for me to do it again? And when the doctor said that it was not something I was allowed to do, I was like, okay, you know what? That's another message from God saying, this is not what you should be doing. And you've done it once, and you have, thank God, they have a healthy baby. He's now a child. He's 3.5 years old. But it was at that point that I was like, okay, so it's another loss I have to come to terms with, but it's okay.
Yeah, I was going to say that's probably another loss that you have to deal with, because that decision was, kind of taken from you. Like, you
Right.
weren't able to decide for yourself, okay, like, I ended this way, I'm ready to be done. It was like,
Right.
well, you have to be done.
Right. Fortunately, they did say that if we wanted to try again for a baby of our own, that it was safe to do so. And my husband and I are still trying to figure out if that's something that's in the cards for us. But at least that part of it, I know that there are so many women who they've gone through a traumatic birth and they have to have a hysterectomy, or they have cancer, and that part of it is taken away so suddenly. I felt at least a little bit of solace saying, okay, well, at least I know that that option is still on the table. Whatever the conclusion might be, whatever the decision might be, we'll welcome another child with open arms if it happens.
Right. And I mean, I do understand, obviously they are spending a lot of money. They do want, like, as perfect as it can be. It makes sense, but it still
Right.
is hard.
Yeah.
So are there any particular things that helped you get through the grief?
Like I said, I deep dived into Pinterest and research on the internet and everything. And I ended up actually putting together a workbook, a pregnancy loss workbook, because I found different things that worked for me, and I wanted to share that with others. So some of the things that I found, and the first thing I did, which was actually something my best friend's daughter had introduced me to years ago, is to do a calendar. And the way that I set it up and the way that she taught me was that you essentially have a grid. So you can do it on graph paper. You can do it in the book that I have, because I have the grid in there, but you assign an emotion to a color. So I always say, like, red could be anger, feeling calm could be purple, feeling happy could be green. And every day, at the end of the day, you mark one or two of the overwhelming emotions that you've had for that day. So it could be that maybe you started out in the morning and you woke up and you thought this is going to be a really good day, and then something triggered you and it turned into a sour day. So you can draw a diagonal across the middle of that little box and say, okay, the top part could be green and the bottom part might be red or brown or black. And to be able to look back on each day as its individual thing, as opposed to looking back and saying, like, oh my gosh, this week just melded all into one. This month just flew by. I feel like the whole month was a loss and I felt awful. But then if I go back at each day, I can say, wait, I had a really good day, or I had 5 really good days, or I had 10 really good days, whatever it is, to then say, maybe it's not just melting all one into the next. So to separate each day, that really, really helped a lot. Another thing that helped was learning how to breathe properly, where I am not a meditative person. I've never been one for yoga. I've never been one to just sit and be alone with my thoughts and say, okay, just breathe in and out. Like I can't do it. I don't know if it's ADHD in me or something, but I just can't sit still. But to be able to come up with a few different techniques that really worked when, for example, we live close to Disney, and there was a day where I went, my kids had already gone to their homeschool program, and I thought, you know what, I really just need to be at Magic Kingdom. So I walked down Main Street and I went into a store, and the person who I was speaking to had the same name as the mom. And that was really triggering. And I didn't know how triggering it was going to be, but to be able to assess the situation and breathe through it and find these different techniques that I could say, okay, square breathing for me really helps. You breathe in, you hold it, breathe out, you hold it. It was a technique that I just could sit for a moment and say, okay, I can understand the trigger. I can understand where it's coming from. I'm going to let it happen, but I'm going to be able to manage it. So those things are in the workbook. It really, really helped a lot because you don't know what's going to trigger you. You don't know what, you might have named your baby. Maybe somebody that you hear walking down the street calls that name. Or, my date is coming up. August 25th was the day that I actually gave birth. So next Friday, I know is going to be a really hard day. So to know that that's coming and to be able to sort of prepare yourself in advance with those techniques to manage your stress, to manage your emotions and not control them. You want to be able to feel them, but to be able to understand that it's totally normal to feel all these different emotions at the same time.
I love that idea. I actually have never heard of like doing the calendar that way with the
Really?
different emotions, but I really like that because you're right. You do just kind of look back at the past week or month or whatever, and you think like, well, it just kind of sucked or like,
Right.
whatever. But I think what you said is good that you can go back and be like, oh, look, I was happy here. Like it
Right.
wasn't all horrible.
Right. Right. And you might not remember what made you happy, but you can at least recognize that it was a good day.
And I think a lot of us, don't or feel like we're not allowed to be happy again after going through loss. So I think
Yeah.
that's, especially important to recognize the days that we feel that way because you're allowed to be happy again. You don't
Mm-hmm.
have to be sad every day.
And it can happen at the same time, right? Like there will be times where you'd have a really happy event. For example, somebody else that I'm very close with had a due date that was 2 days off from mine. So when that baby was born, I was thrilled for her. And that I'm still very close with them. And that baby, like whenever I go over, I'm like, that we have a connection, right? And like as she gets older, I'm like, that I'm here. And it's like having a baby. But at the same time, I was so overcome with grief because I knew that I would have had a baby at the same time, feeling those two diametrically opposite emotions, understanding that that was okay and it's in human nature to feel more than one thing at the same time, made it much more real and made it much more human for me.
Yeah, I've seen like, people or quotes and stuff about how, grief and joy coexist at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's not one or the other. It's usually a mix of both.
Right.
And yeah, I do. I find that hard, that there's certain days, we're coming, like you said, like the due dates, the things like that. But sometimes those triggers just come out of nowhere. I'm just like, whoa,
Yeah.
where, like, what happened?
Yeah, I say a lot. I mean, that phrase that comes in waves really makes sense because you think about grief, and that was another thing. I thought grief was very linear, right? You have the 5 stages of grief. You feel denial, you feel anger, you come to terms with it. And when I would go back and forth and question everything and say, well, what if I did this? And what if I did that? And what if, and what if, and what if? But then changing that to what now? I can't change what happened. I can only change my outlook. And to know that grief is messy and it's not linear, and to say that sometimes I'm going to go back to the anger, and sometimes something could trigger me that might make me go into denial. But at the same time, that's again, it's normal. You're not alone in that.
I think so many of us feel that same way that grief is supposed to be like those stages because I feel like that's what you're taught. Like
Right.
here you go through these and then you're done.
Right.
That's not
Right.
that's
You've
not
made it through the
realistic.
denial stage. Now you can be done with it. And you're like, no, but in a month, I'm going back to all of the, but it didn't happen. And what if it this and what if that? And that's normal.
But then you feel like you're doing something wrong, like you're,
Right.
because you're not through it. And I'm like, that's just,
Right.
yeah, it's not how it works, people.
No, no. If it was linear, it would be much easier.
So do you still talk about your loss like with your kids? Like do you include the baby in your family things or anything?
Not as much. And I think that's probably where it comes from being the surrogate as opposed to being the mom, because it, like, I don't know what life would have been like with the baby here because it's not our baby. So it's not like I'm missing, you know, family events, holidays, things like that, where this person should be here and should be growing and I should be seeing that progress every day. In that respect, I think it's a little bit easier. Um, my daughter is still definitely aware of it. where I put together with my workbook, I have a whole pregnancy loss toolkit. And so this past week, I actually went back to the hospital where I did deliver, and I went up to L&D and I brought it to the nurse's station. And I said, in honor and in memory of this baby, I wanted to give this to another lost mom between now and then. Unfortunately, I know what's going to happen. I don't know who it's going to be. And I would like this to be my gift to them. And
I
so
love that you did that.
thank you. She was with me, and I think that it meant a lot to see for her. It meant a lot to me for her to see it, but I think also for her to understand that just because the baby's not here doesn't mean that we still can't talk about him and talk about the life that could have been, and to honor him in the way that we find meaningful to us.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it helps for them to see it in action.
Right.
Instead of just talking about it, like, here are some things that we can do, as a family or together, or,
Right.
just to, and also help other lost families too.
Right. Right. Like, and unfortunately, when I was pregnant with my third, one of my best friends was also pregnant, and they lost the baby as a stillbirth, literally days before the due date. And they have subsequently since have had a child, thank God. But what they do every year on her birthday is they go to the gravesite, they bring a cupcake, and they do celebrate her. Even though she's not here, they want to make sure that the baby that's alive now, who's actually 7 years old, 6 years old, 6 years old, that she knows that she's technically a little sister, even though right now she's an only child. And so I think that also finding the way that it is meaningful to you. And for some people, I know that means not talking about it again, which is really painful for some. But for others, that's the way that they move on. And for some people, it means that you do bring them up. You do have, if you're a Christian, you could put, a little ornament on the tree with a little memory for them, or you could have something on your mantle. Or, I know people that do pictures every year with their families, and some people don't talk about it. And some people say, well, we're going to have this little picture or doll or teddy bear or something that represents this person who's not here.
And I think there's no right or wrong way to do it. It's just what's right for you and your family.
Yep.
So do you have any advice for people who are newly going through a loss?
The first thing I would say is that you're not alone. It's a topic that's not talked about nearly enough, and it's not your fault. So to know that you have a support system, to know that there are places like your podcast to reach out to, there are websites, there are workbooks, there are other tools to work through it. When you find your village, whether it's a village that you know already existed or it's a new village, because unfortunately you're now initiated into this club that nobody should ever be in, you're not alone. And I think that's, if I had known that more, the first few days would have been a little easier.
I think it's hard to, we don't know that those communities are there until you need it, but it's not like they're, I don't know if advertised is the right word for it, but
right.
Not like
it is a hard topic, but death is part of life, and it shouldn't be something that we're scared about to talk to each other about our experiences and about what happens. Like everyone has a parent, and everyone is going to lose someone. And it's whether it's a baby that you've never fully met, or it's an adult that has lived 100 years, it's still hard. And it should be something that we can say, this is not your fault. You have a community that you can rely on and that you can talk to, who can empathize with you. And even if it's just finding that one person, like I had a friend, I didn't know she had a miscarriage before I had mine, but she had a miscarriage 2 years before me, and she was able to tell me about it. And we literally would just sit in the weeks following mine, and she would just let me cry, or just let me be, or talk about it or not talk about it. And I remember saying to her at one point, I don't want our relationship to just be me crying all the time. And she said, don't worry, we'll get back to that place where we can have a good time. But right now, let it sit, let it feel, let your emotions really be there and be present for them. And it will get easier.
We all need a friend like that. I
Totally.
know a lot of people don't have that person, but I think we all need that person.
Yeah. And it could be your spouse. And sometimes it's not. Like my husband he's not an emotional person. And especially because of the fact that this wasn't even our baby, he wanted to make sure that I was okay. But he was like, I'm not affected by this. You're alive, you're healthy. I get that you're in this dark place right now, but I don't know what to do for you. And so to find that person who wasn't necessarily my husband was okay.
Right. Yeah, I think we think that our spouse should be the everything for us. And
Right.
sometimes it's, yeah, you're right, that it needs to be another person, even
Right.
just temporarily or, whatever, until you can figure things out, I guess.
Right. Right. And sometimes you just need to say stuff out loud that you're like, oh, I don't really want to say that to him. Like I don't, because,
Mhm.
and I was afraid that was the other thing. I was afraid I was going to take it out on him. So I would say to him, like, right now, I just need to be me. I just need to be by myself, or I just need to be with this person. And he got it, thankfully.
Do you think that people treat like grief surrounding pregnancy or infant loss different than grief surrounding the loss of other like family members?
I think if you've never experienced it, then yes. And even there were times where I would go back and forth in my head of saying, like, this baby was still under 20 weeks. So who am I to grieve over a baby that I was just barely starting to feel versus somebody who had a stillbirth where they know the personality of this baby. But then I thought, okay, but there's people who have ectopic pregnancies who have a whole dream and a whole vision of what their life is going to look like with this child, that they're grieving not only the child, but the life that they thought they were going to have. So it is a different grief than after knowing somebody for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, or seeing somebody that's had a full life and pass away. But it's still a grief and it's still acceptable. I mean, there's, who am I to say that nothing is acceptable when it comes to grief? You feel the way you feel, and that's just what it is.
Right. I've heard, a lot of the unsensitive or insensitive comments, towards pregnancy loss, like just
Yes.
try again, like all those kind of things. And I'm like, those aren't things that you would say, like, oh, sorry you lost your mom. At least you
But
can
you
get
can
another
have another
mom.
one.
I know. It's like, what, like, what? It doesn't make sense to me.
Right. Right. No, and there's people, and I guess that's something we learn also in pregnancy. Like people just feel like they can say whatever they want, right? Like when you have a pregnant belly popping out, you've got hands coming at you and you've got people commenting, wow, you look so big or you look so small, or they just feel like they can comment on whatever they want. So I feel like they're much more sensitive to having a loss that is an adult or even a child who's already here and born and a few years old versus a pregnancy loss where there's just sometimes there's not that filter, and insensitive comments come out a lot. And they don't, it's not that they mean to, it's just that they don't know what else to say.
Yeah, I think most people aren't trying to be like mean spirited or anything by
No.
it. I think they're trying to be helpful. They just don't see that it is not helpful.
Right. Right.
And
And
I
I
think
think
you're
just recognizing that, look, the person is trying, and maybe that person is just somebody you need to keep a distance from for a little bit, but you can go back to them when you're feeling a little bit more in control, when you're feeling a little bit more like you can manage that side of your emotion as opposed to letting it get to you. Because sometimes if you hear it in a different respect or in a different time, it's not going to bother you as much.
right. That's true. I know sometimes it's hard to avoid family members, but
Yes.
but I say try if you can, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Don't pick up the phone when your mom calls if she's the one that's the force behind it. Or don't pick up when your sister calls or your brother or whoever it is. Let it sit for a little while.
Right. You can be busy sometimes.
Yes.
So going back to you mentioned that after your loss that you did research. Did you find that there was a lot of information out there, or did you find that you think it's like lacking?
It really depends. I think that there's a lot of um clinical information, and like there it was so easy to find what are the stages of miscarriage and what are the symptoms of miscarriage and what are everything from the clinics of what you can go through and what you can experience. And there wasn't a lot of resources to say, I just need to find the community that I know will understand. One of the things that I love about our health system down here is that I was referred to a therapist who is also a lost parent. His wife had a stillbirth. I think they said it was 35 years ago or 37 years ago. I don't remember exactly. And he's been in therapy as a therapist for lost parents for many years and created this group called Heal, that is all about getting parents together that are loss survivors, anything from ectopic pregnancy all the way up through and including infant death, that you can then find that community. And it's an 8-week course that once a week, it used to be in person, and then with COVID, obviously things got switched up a little bit. So now it's actually on Zoom, which made it a little bit more comfortable, because I could sit in my own bed as opposed to going to what felt like almost like an AA meeting. And all of the moms actually have still kept in touch. That group finished, I want to say Thanksgiving was our last meeting last year. And now some of the moms are actually giving birth to a baby that they didn't have before. They didn't have that experience. So we actually just got a text this week that one of them had a scheduled C-section, and she and the baby are doing fantastic. And so it's like that part of it gives me hope, and that part of it is helping to heal, because I can see all of our recovery together. And I know there was nothing in the world that would have ever brought us in the same place, but yet we're all in this club now, and we can all empathize with each other, and we can all say, okay, if somebody else announces a pregnancy, they have a group to talk to. They have a group of women who knows exactly what they're feeling at that moment and can empathize. Beyond that, I just felt like resources were really lacking.
Yeah, it really is the best club that none of us ever wanted to be part of, but
Yeah.
amazing people.
Yeah.
So then you created your toolkit.
I did. I figured I really needed to put all of the things together that I had learned into the workbook first. And that's really, I mean, I felt like my kids barely saw me for 2 full weeks straight, because I was at the computer putting different pieces together, putting the different coloring aspects and journaling resources and things that I felt either I had done before this loss that were just part of my journaling experience, and then things that I had discovered after the loss that I said, this really helped me. And so when I finished the workbook, I was like, okay, I need to do something else. What more can I do? And so I then made affirmation cards. I created a whole little kit that has different items to let the person know they're not alone, that somebody else could potentially buy it and say, I know you're going through this. Here's a basket of, it's got some chocolates, it's got a mug, it's got some fuzzy socks, things like that, to just say, I'm here for you. And whenever you're ready, I let me know. I'm here if you want to talk, if you don't want to talk, whatever.
I think that's great, because I think a lot of people just kind of go, I don't know what to do. Like, what do I get them? Like, what do I? And I think that's the perfect thing, just like comfort items, because there's really nothing you can do in the moment to make them feel better. So just knowing, hey, I'm thinking of you means a lot.
Right. And I think one of the things that really helped was finding ways to honor the baby and putting that in the workbook, to say, I know that day's coming, and I know that day where I have to say, okay, it's been a year. How do I want to remember the baby? I give a whole bunch of different options as to all these different things that you can do or not do. Take it or leave it for what it is. But instead of saying, I'm not having a birthday party, like what do I do? Just to have somebody else say, I've been through it. I know. Here's some ideas. Maybe you could even take one of the ideas and do something slightly different. But it's just getting the ball rolling in your head to say, okay, just because the baby's not here doesn't mean I still can't celebrate that life.
Right. Which, yeah, I think people are just don't know what to do most of the time. So I think that's great, giving them ideas, and then they can go with it where they want. So where would people go to find more information about that or to purchase it?
Everything is on my website, which is KelilaGreenSpeaker.com. So my name is spelled Kelila, green spelled just like the color, and then speaker. And it's got all of the different resources that I have on there. I actually came out with another workbook that's really more for anybody, not necessarily pregnancy loss, but just to be able to create that inner strength warrior, so that when something does happen, you have the tools to be able to deal with it and handle it and manage it properly, as opposed to letting it spiral out of control. And so it's got all of those things on there. And I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. Facebook is my name, Kelila Beth Green, and Instagram is my company name, which is Ours and Yours, spelled Ours, OURS, and A-N-D. Yours is spelled Y-R-S. It's actually my daughter's initials.
Oh, I love that.
Thanks.
So is there anything else that you'd like to share or add?
I just want whoever's listening to know, like I said before, that you're not alone, that unfortunately loss is a part of life. And if you don't reach out to me, I might not be your person, but there are other resources that you can find, and just to find somebody that you can be with.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your story.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure to be able to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Kelila, for sharing your story with us. This is a theme I have heard so often with many lost parents. It was just really hard to find the resources when they needed them most. And not all hospitals or doctors even give out this information, so we're often left searching on our own. And I think it's especially hard if you had a, quote, less common type of loss, as most of the resources are centered around either miscarriage or stillbirth. When we go through loss, we want to connect with those that have been through a similar experience, and those can be really hard to find with certain types of loss. And I truly appreciate all of the organizations that have put together lists and websites of resources for lost parents. You can never have too many of them, in my opinion. And it shouldn't take us all of this searching and trying keyword after keyword until we finally find the right thing that we're looking for. Loss is so common that we should be given these resources, or at least pointed in the right direction. What do you think? Did you struggle to find resources after your loss? You can always let me know by emailing me at sarah@journeyforjasmine.com. I always like hearing about other people's experience and learning new ways that we can improve help for lost parents in the future. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. If you like the show, please leave a review or rating on Apple or Spotify. It only takes a moment and really helps the show reach more lost and infertility families. Thank you so much for tuning in, and remember, we are all in this together.